Hello, how's it going, everybody? Polivoks, the legendary Polivoks Russian synthesizer. This one was made in 1987, and I had it shipped to Canada. And I love the sound of these machines, and always had a dream of owning a really gnarly analog synthesizer to go with my DX7. And I brought this in. It was in excellent condition, and had a great time playing it until one day I was playing my riff on here, and the Polivoks sounded like it shorted out, and it was every key sounded the same, and none of the controls would work, and I was like, oh crap. So I saw some other videos that have been posted a while back about similar fault with the Polivoks, and I would like to explain to you what it was with mine and potentially what it could be with yours and how to fix it. So this is a 220 volt machine because it comes from Russia, and it uses a 220 volt source. So I bought a nice one on eBay that is safe, that puts out nice smooth power, and it's quite large. It's good up to, like, I think a couple thousand watts, but this only pulls like 10 watts or something. It's minor, so I just wanted a really nice power source for it, so I knew that wouldn't be the problem. Some of the 220 sources can like burn your house down. They're really cheaply made, so you have to choose wisely. So these are the capacitors that came out of the Polivoks, and you can see here that there's some Cyrillic writing like all over. This thing is Russian. It's very cool looking, but for Western people it's hard to understand this. So where it says K50, the K is a V, so that's 50 volts and 2000 microfarads. So this capacitor is bad. I made an X here, it's no longer any good. And this capacitor, it turned out it was good, and I made a check mark there. So where you have the lettering here, this is the positive terminal, and this is marked positive. And where there's no lettering, this is the negative terminal. It's really, really important that when you change these two capacitors, it's to get the polarity correct. And I had put marks on my wire, and I taped my wire, and I had found these two capacitors, 50 volts, that's good, 3,300 microfarads, that's great because it helps control EMS. This here is 2,000 microfarads, this is higher, that's good. You don't want to go lower, you can go higher, that's not a problem. In fact, it's a good thing. So as long as you change them both at the same time. So you can see here on this modern, more modern capacitor that they're physically a lot smaller, and they're actually huge compared to the capacitors I finally did put in. So what happened was I had my wire in some tape, and overnight the wire slipped and it moved, and I had the wire marked on the tape, and I hooked this one in with the wrong polarity. You can see it's negative. This strip here means negative, and this is positive, but we know on a capacitor that this is negative these days. So this thing, and I played a few notes, and I was really happy because I got the Polivoks working again, and then there was this big explosion and smoke poured out of the back over there, and I thought, yep, I just destroyed it again. So all it was this little guy here was put in backwards, and voltage builds up on the wrong plate, and it goes and it heats up, and this scoring exploded, and you can see it's crowned, and it blew oil all over the inside of the synthesizer, so that kind of sucked. But once I went away and calmed down a little bit and thought about it, I realized that my marks on my tape, the tape could have let the wires move. So I desoldered these, powered the synthesizer up, and tested with my multimeter on the wires that go to this, and yeah, it was showing that I had made a mistake. So fine, I fixed it, and I used actually even more modern capacitors than this, and they are like even smaller and longer, so they're quite tiny, but they're 50 volts, and they're probably like a fifth of the size of this. They're 50 volts, and I got 2200 microfarad caps, and so now the signal is beautiful. So beautiful. You gotta love these synthesizers, right? They're just... And since I fixed it, I think the filter is cleaner. It actually seems more powerful of an effect. So the leakage in the other capacitor was manifesting itself until it got to a certain point, and then it just failed. So I wanted to show anybody that doesn't know anything about capacitors, you don't have to go have a huge repair bill for your Polivoks. I'll show you how to test a capacitor. There's a number of ways to test a capacitor. Pretty interesting, and it will kind of give you an idea of what you need to look for when you are working on the capacitor to replace it. So here I have a Fluke multimeter. My dad left me, he passed away sadly, but he was an electronics engineer, and I would have loved for him to see this thing. So we're going to switch this to ohms, and then there's a little symbol here in electronic language. It means capacitor. So we're going to switch over with the function button to the yellow, and here it says nanofarads, but we know that this capacitor, what we're testing, is in microfarads, so it's bigger. So here we have the old Polivoks one from the Soviet Union, 1987, or even older. It's all military stuff, and we're going to, we know this is positive because that's the way that they did it back in the USSR. So we're going to go like this, and we're going to go like that, and we're going to put the leads across, and it will figure out, oh, it knows now, okay, microfarad, nice, and it's charging up the cap, and we'll see what it shows for capacitance rating. 2184 in around. So the thing's rated for 2000 microfarads, and it's showing us it's pretty close to that, and that's not bad tolerance for an old soup can like this thing, so pretty good. So what if we look at volts? Okay, so I had a 9-volt battery laying around here. I don't know where it went now, doggone it. But pretty important test, because you can charge up this thing with a battery and then read the voltage and DC volts, and it will show you whether or not it's holding a charge. But this should have residual voltage in it right now. So this here is the negative and positive. So if we hook this thing up this way, it shows here that there's a residual voltage of 0.433 volts in there, and it's showing positive just because it doesn't say negative. But if we flip it around and go backwards, look, negative. So we automatically know with that simple test, the residual voltage, that this here is positive. And this could be no marks, but we know, looking at the voltage, okay, that this here is the correct polarity. Red is positive, that is positive, and look where the writing is. Positive, 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 positive. Okay, that's how you know. Obviously, that's the good capacitor. Now let's look at what the bad capacitor does. This is kind of neat. I like it. It's fun when you find a solution to the problem to keep going back and looking at how you solved it, because it makes you feel smart, and it's not something I ever really feel about myself. I feel too smart. Okay. So this here, first we need to know positive. Okay, we know that positive lead, and I switched it to the capacitance test, so it's going to decide, the meter will figure out what it is, nanofarads or microfarads, and then it's going to switch over. Ah yes, look at what's happening, something crazy. It's leaking across the plates. It's doing all kinds of crazy stuff, because you remember the other one, it just said 2182 or something. This one is like cooked. So what about residual voltage? Let's see. See what we have. No, it's all screwed up like dynamite. In fact, it's even saying it's negative there when we know it isn't. So this one, yeah, even the polarity is flipped around. It's cooked. Something went really wrong in this thing, and this is why the sweet sound stopped. And sometimes maybe people who are unfamiliar with Polivoks think their machine is broken because one of the knobs, it only makes that sound. But if you're not familiar with analog synthesizers, have a better look at the panel and make sure that cutoff isn't down, or maybe the envelope control isn't all the way down, or the volume, or maybe the mute switch is flipped. There could be a number of reasons it's not making sounds for you that day, or it could be these. So everything we discussed about capacitors, including exploding them, that all has commonality with all the capacitors in this machine. But the interesting thing with these big pigs here is they take a beating off of that transformer. They're smoothing capacitors, so they smooth out the power before it gets to the rest of the machine, and they tend to fail, you know, whereas the little capacitors in here, they don't fail as much. But if something else breaks, open it up, look at the boards, and see if you can't find a capacitor that has a blown top, so they're scored like this, so that when they get hot from an internal failure, they have a way of letting off steam, and you'll see it, especially one this big. This is a rubber plug. This could have blown, but this did. So you might see a capacitor so small and there's oil leaking out of it, or the top's exploded. And when you find those, it's really fun, because then a couple of solder dots and out she goes, and put the right one in and feel like a space rocket guy. It's nice to have one of these too. And if you don't have one and you have an analog one, just go online and look for a way to test capacitors with an analog one. And yeah, so don't be afraid, because it's pretty simple inside. It's 80s electronics, and if you are not good at electronics and soldering, having this video, you take this to somebody who is, and they'll be able to get through it pretty quickly, because even the schematics for the Polivoks are all in Russian. And yeah, so it's like making it much more difficult to understand. But for an electronics guy, they know what these symbols are, and you know, resistors and diodes and all this other stuff, and ICs, you know, ICs. So they can do pretty good at that. So I hope that helps, and don't panic if your Polivoks seems like it's dying on you. It's probably something simple. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to help you with them at the bottom. I'm not an electronics engineer. My dad used to be one, and I hope that some of the stuff I explained, if it's incorrect, you get the idea that I'm just an amateur and I do the best I can. But this thing is a long way from home, and my dad passed away, so now it's basically up to me to learn. And fortunately, I found a guy that speaks Russian and is also an electronics engineer in town here, so that's like completely crazy. And he knows about this stuff, because he lived in Poland like until the revolution in '81. Like, it's crazy. My dad's Hungarian. He ran from that revolution in 1956, and he always had a real love of electronics, and he went and supported us all those years we were kids. So anyway, I hope you enjoy the video, and you can keep your Polivoks or any of your exotic synthesizer equipment running. Okay, have fun. Bye bye.